Commander Zethvar of the Krillian Empire sat in the dim lighting of the warriors' hall, his forearms folded across his chest as he stared into the glowing embers of the ceremonial fire. Around him, dozens of young recruits leaned forward, their eyes wide with anticipation. The veteran commander's scarred carapace told stories of countless battles across the galaxy, but tonight he would share the most chilling tales he had ever witnessed. "You think you know fear," Zethvar began, his voice a low rumble that made the recruits straighten in their seats. "You think the Vorthan death squads are terrifying. You think the Nexus Mindslavers are the stuff of nightmares. But none of you have ever faced a human in true rage." Young recruit Kixlon shifted uncomfortably. "Commander, humans are just another species. They're small, weak, have only 2 arms. How dangerous could they really be?" A bitter laugh escaped Zethvar's throat. "That's what I thought too, young one. That's what we all thought. The humans had just joined the Galactic Council 50 cycles ago. They seemed pleasant enough, diplomatic, eager to trade and share their knowledge. We called them the soft ones behind their backs." The commander stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the stars. "I was stationed on Terminus Station when it happened, a peaceful trading post where dozens of species came to conduct business. Humans had set up a small embassy there, maybe 20 of their people. Families, mostly. Scientists, diplomats, traders." He turned back to face the recruits, his expression grave. "The Bloodclaw Raiders attacked without warning. You know their reputation. They take no prisoners, leave no survivors. 3 full battle cruisers against a lightly defended station. We thought it would be over in minutes." Zethvar began pacing, his memories clearly haunting him. The station's defenses fell quickly. The raiders poured in through multiple breach points, cutting down civilians as they ran. I was part of the security force, and we were overwhelmed within the first hour. The raiders were systematic, methodical. They herded survivors into the main plaza for execution. The fire crackled in the silence as the recruits hung on every word. Among the captured were the human families. I watched as the raiders separated the adults from their young. In human culture, these offspring are called children, and they are precious beyond measure to their parents. The Bloodclaw commander, a massive brute named Gorthak, decided to make an example. He ordered his warriors to harm one of the human children in front of the crowd. Zethvar's voice grew quieter, more intense. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about biology, psychology, and the nature of sentient beings. The human father, a small, unremarkable male named David Chun, simply changed. "Changed how?" whispered recruit Vexera. "His entire body chemistry altered in seconds. His eyes, which had been brown, turned almost black. His face became something predatory, something primal. But it wasn't just his appearance. There was an energy around him, something that made my survival instincts scream in terror." Zethvar resumed his pacing. David Chun was a botanist, a scientist who studied plants. He had never held a weapon in his life. But when that raider moved toward his child, this peaceful human became something else entirely. He didn't shout or threaten. He didn't beg or plead. He simply moved. The commander paused, his expression distant. "I've seen Krillian berserkers in battle frenzy. I've witnessed the legendary fury of the Scaran battle masters. But nothing prepared me for human rage." Chin moved with impossible speed and precision. His bare hands became weapons more deadly than any blade. The first raider never saw it coming. Chun grabbed the warrior's head and twisted with such force that the sound echoed across the plaza. 3 more raiders rushed him, and he flowed between them like liquid death. Every movement was efficient, brutal, final. Recruit Inaelthar raised a shaky hand. "But, Commander, one human against trained warriors? Surely the others." "You're not understanding," Zethvar cut him off. It wasn't just Chun. Every human in that plaza was transforming. The mothers, the elderly scientists, even their adolescent children. Something primal had awakened in their species, something that civilization had only barely contained. The commander's voice grew more urgent. The human female, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was a medical researcher. Gentle, kind, dedicated to healing. But when the raiders threatened her nephew, she picked up a piece of broken metal and went after a Bloodclaw warrior twice her size. She didn't just fight him. She destroyed him with a savagery that made seasoned soldiers vomit. But how is this possible? Kixlon asked. Their bodies are so much weaker than ours. That's what we thought, Zethvar replied. But we learned something that night about human evolution. Their species didn't evolve on a gentle world like many of ours. They came from a death planet, a world where everything was trying to kill them. Their ancestors survived by developing the most sophisticated fight-or-flight response in the known galaxy. He moved closer to the fire, the light casting dancing shadows across his face. When humans experience extreme emotional stress, particularly when they're young or loved ones are threatened, their bodies flood with chemicals that turn them into living weapons. Their strength increases dramatically. Their pain tolerance becomes absolute. Their reaction time accelerates beyond normal biological limits. Dr. Lisa Park, a cultural anthropologist, explained it to me later, Zethvar continued. She called it hysterical strength, an emergency response that allows humans to perform impossible feats. There are records of human females lifting vehicles to save their children, of humans fighting with mortal wounds that would incapacitate any other species. The recruits exchanged nervous glances as their commander's tale grew more unsettling. But it's not just the physical transformation, Zethvar said. Something happens to their minds as well. They become tactically brilliant in ways that defy explanation. Chun, who had never seen combat, began coordinating the other humans with the skill of a veteran general. The humans formed into small units, each protecting the other's families. They used improvised weapons with deadly creativity. Dr. James Wilson, an elderly historian, fashioned explosive devices from cleaning supplies and power cells. Professor Angela Kim turned her archaeological tools into precision weapons that could pierce raider armor. Zethvar's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The most terrifying part was their faces. They showed no fear, no hesitation, no mercy. They had become something beyond civilized beings. They had become their ancestors, the apex predators of their nightmare world. The tide turned completely in less than 20 minutes. 300 Bloodclaw Raiders, some of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, were being systematically hunted and eliminated by 20 humans who had been peaceful civilians moments before. The commander sat back down, his expression haunted. I watched Dr. Chen corner Commander Gordhack in the station's hydroponics bay. The raider was armed with a plasma rifle and energy blade. Chen had nothing but his hands and a metal pipe. But the human moved like death itself, anticipating every attack, flowing around Gordhack's strikes like he could see the future. When it was over, when the last raider had fallen, something even more remarkable happened. The humans simply stopped. The rage left them as quickly as it had come. Dr. Chun knelt beside his injured child, his hands gentle once again, tears streaming down his face. The botanist had returned, but now I knew what lived beneath the surface. Zethvar looked around the circle of young faces, seeing his own fear reflected in their eyes. That's when I truly understood why the humans had been so successful on their world. They weren't just intelligent or adaptable. They were the perfect survivors, capable of limitless gentleness and boundless fury, often within the same being. But, Commander, Vexera asked quietly, surely this was an isolated incident? Humans can't all be like this. A grim smile crossed Zethvar's features. That's what I told myself for years, until the hegemony wars began, and I saw entire human colonies react the same way to invasion. Until I witnessed human soldiers who fought for days with wounds that would kill most species. Until I learned about their history, thousands of years of constant warfare, where only the most adaptable and fierce survived to pass on their genes. Every human carries this capacity within them, he continued. Their poets write about it. Their stories celebrate it. They call it righteous fury or protective instinct. But what it really is the awakening of something primal and terrifying. The fire was burning lower now, casting longer shadows across the hall. The recruits sat in stunned silence, processing what they had heard. I've seen humans angry about injustice, Zethvar said. I've seen them enraged by cruelty to the innocent. I've watched them become living weapons when their values are threatened. And, every time, I'm reminded that beneath their civilization, beneath their smiles and kindness, lurks something that made them the dominant species on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. So when you encounter humans in the field, he concluded, remember this. Treat them with respect. Protect their young and innocent. Honor their values of fairness and justice. Because if you don't, if you threaten what they hold dear, you won't be facing humans anymore. You'll be facing something far older, far deadlier, and absolutely without mercy. The hall fell silent except for the crackling of the dying fire. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, but the young warriors now knew that among them moved a species capable of transforming from gentle beings into unstoppable forces of nature. As the recruits filed out, heads full of new understanding and healthy fear, Commander Zethvar remained by the fire. Tomorrow, he would continue their education with more tales of human fury. But tonight, he simply sat and remembered the faces of those 20 humans on Terminus Station and wondered if any species in the galaxy truly understood what they had welcomed into the galactic community. The next evening found Commander Zethvar once again seated before the ceremonial fire, but this time the warriors' hall was packed. Word of his human tales had spread throughout the base, and even senior officers had come to listen. The veteran commander noticed the increased attention, but showed no sign of being affected by it. Last night, some of you may have thought my story was exaggerated. He began without preamble. Tonight, I will share what I witnessed during the hegemony invasion of New Terra Colony. Perhaps then, you will understand that what happened on Terminus Station was not unusual. It was simply the first time I had seen humans truly threatened. Captain Mordex, a decorated veteran, leaned forward from the back of the crowd. Commander, I fought in the hegemony wars. Human soldiers were effective, yes, but they followed standard military doctrine. They weren't the monsters you described yesterday. Zethvar's eyes found the captains in the crowd. That's because you fought alongside human military, Captain. Trained soldiers who had learned to channel their fury into disciplined action. What I witnessed was something far more raw, far more primal. The commander stood and gestured to a star chart on the wall. New Terra was a civilian colony. Families who had left Earth to build a peaceful agricultural settlement on the Rim worlds. When the hegemony decided to expand their territory, they chose New Terra as an easy target. Intelligence reports indicated minimal defenses, no military presence, just farmers and their children. The hegemony sent a moderate force, Zethvar continued. 3 assault carriers and supporting vessels. Against any normal civilian population, it would have been massive overkill. They expected to land, claim the territory, and either evacuate or enslave the humans with minimal resistance. He paused, studying the faces before him. I was part of the Galactic Council's rapid response team. We arrived 2 days after the invasion began, expecting to find refugees or negotiate for prisoners. Instead, we found something that defied every military manual ever written. Young recruit Kixlon, who had returned despite his obvious fear, raised his hand. What did you find, Commander? We found the hegemony forces trapped, Zethvar replied. 3 full assault carriers worth of elite troops, cornered in their own landing zones, desperately calling for extraction. The humans hadn't just resisted, they had gone on the offensive. The commander began pacing again, his 4 arms gesturing as he spoke. The first sign something was wrong came from the hegemony communications we intercepted. Their field reports spoke of impossible human tactics and unnatural resistance to injury. Their commanders were requesting heavy weapons and orbital support against what should have been defenseless farmers. When we made contact with the human settlement, Zethvar's voice grew more intense. I met their leader, a woman named Mary Chan. She was covered in soil and blood, but her eyes held the same darkness I had seen in her relative David on Terminus Station. She greeted us politely, offered us food and water, then calmly explained that they were dealing with some uninvited guests. Captain Mordex shifted uncomfortably. Commander, surely a few hundred farmers couldn't defeat trained soldiers. That's what logic would dictate, Zethvar agreed. But logic doesn't account for what humans become when their homes are threatened. Mary led us to the colony's main settlement, and what I saw there changed my understanding of warfare forever. The commander's voice dropped to draw his audience closer. The humans had turned their entire colony into a weapon. Every building was a fortress, every field a killing ground. every irrigation ditch a defensive position. But, more than that, they had transformed themselves. Tom Rodriguez had been a veterinarian before the invasion. When we met him, he was leading a squad of farmers who had been systematically hunting hegemony scouts for 3 days straight. He moved through the terrain like a predator, reading tracks and signs that even our best scouts couldn't detect. His peaceful profession had given him intimate knowledge of anatomy, which he was now applying to disable enemy soldiers with surgical precision. Zephyr gestured to emphasize his point. Sarah Kim had operated the colony's communications network. During the invasion, she had transformed their civilian infrastructure into the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation I had ever witnessed. She knew the location, strength, and condition of every hegemony unit on the planet in real time. But how? Asked Recruit Vexera. Civilian equipment couldn't match military systems. Because humans don't just use technology, they understand it, Zephyr explained. Sarah had modified their agricultural sensors to detect metal composition and body heat. She had turned their weather monitoring system into a planetary surveillance network. Their farming drones became reconnaissance units and, when necessary, improvised weapons. The fire crackled as the commander continued his tale. The most unsettling thing was their coordination. Without any formal military training, they had spontaneously organized into the most effective guerrilla force I had ever encountered. Michael Park, who had taught children at the colony school, was now coordinating ambush tactics with the skill of a veteran general. Every human, from teenagers to grandparents, had found their role in the resistance. Dr. Lisa Martinez, the colony's medical officer, had set up aid stations that doubled as intelligence hubs. She was treating wounds while simultaneously coordinating supply lines and communication networks. Zephyr's expression grew more troubled. What made it truly terrifying was their restraint. These weren't mindless berserkers. They were calculating, efficient, absolutely merciless when necessary. But they never lost sight of their ultimate goal, protecting their community. I watched a squad of farmers, led by an elderly man named Frank Wilson, capture a hegemony patrol without firing a single shot. Frank had been a machinist before retiring to the colony. He had spent 2 days studying hegemony equipment and armor, then designed traps that turned their own technology against them. The commander sat back down, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. But the moment that truly demonstrated human rage was when the hegemony commander ordered an attack on the colony's school. The building was being used as a shelter for the youngest children and elderly who couldn't fight. When the assault began, something changed in every human on that planet. The restraint disappeared. The careful tactics gave way to something primal and unstoppable. Mary Chun, who had been coordinating defensive operations with calm professionalism, became something else entirely. She led a counterattack that broke through 3 layers of hegemony fortifications in less than an hour. She moved through enemy positions like a force of nature, and behind her came every parent, every teacher, every person who had ever cared for a child. Zephyr's voice grew intense with memory. Tom Rodriguez abandoned all medical ethics when he saw injured children. He began systematically hunting hegemony soldiers, using his veterinary knowledge to inflict wounds that would incapacitate rather than kill, then leaving them for their comrades to find as a message. The human teacher, Michael Park, coordinated a flanking maneuver that surrounded the entire hegemony assault force. His classroom management skills had somehow translated into the ability to direct hundreds of civilians in complex military operations. Captain Mordex interrupted. "Commander, you're describing superhuman abilities. Surely you're exaggerating." Zephyr fixed him with a steady gaze. "I thought the same thing, Captain, until I researched human history. Did you know that human mothers have been recorded lifting vehicles weighing several tons to rescue their offspring? Did you know that human soldiers have continued fighting with injuries that would kill most species instantly? Their own scientists have documented cases of humans performing impossible feats under extreme emotional stress. They call it the fight or flight response, but it's far more than that. It's an evolutionary adaptation that allows them to exceed normal biological limitations when survival is threatened." The commander gestured to the star chart again. "On New Terra, I watched Dr. Martinez treat injured fighters for 18 hours straight without rest, food, or water. Her hands never shook. Her concentration never wavered, even as hegemony artillery fell around her aid station. I saw Frank Wilson design and build functional weapons from farming equipment in less than 6 hours. Complex devices that should have taken days to construct, working perfectly the first time because failure meant the death of everyone he cared about. But perhaps the most disturbing example was young Amanda Chun, Mary's daughter. She was 16 Earth years old, barely more than a child by human standards. When hegemony soldiers broke into the school, she didn't panic or hide. She activated emergency systems that her mother had taught her, sealed the building, and held off trained soldiers for 4 hours until help arrived. Zethvar's voice grew quieter. When we found her, she was sitting calmly with the younger children, singing songs to keep them calm, while hegemony corpses lay around defensive positions she had somehow constructed from school furniture. The girl looked up at us with those same dark eyes I had learned to recognize, smiled politely, and asked if we had any food for the little ones. As if holding off armed soldiers was just another responsibility she had accepted. The hall was completely silent now, every being absorbed in the commander's words. By the end of the third day, the hegemony forces were begging for evacuation. Their casualties were mounting, their morale was broken, and they faced an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. Not because the humans had superior weapons or numbers, but because they had become something beyond normal strategic calculation. When the council negotiated the withdrawal, I asked the hegemony commander what had happened to his forces. He was a veteran of dozens of campaigns, a being who had conquered worlds and broken entire civilizations. But when he spoke about the humans, his voice shook. Zethvar leaned forward, his voice becoming a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. He said, "We came to fight farmers and found demons. We came to conquer settlers and found something that will haunt our species forever. Those humans didn't just fight us. They made us understand what it means to face an enemy that literally cannot be broken." After the hegemony withdrawal, I stayed on New Terra for several days to help with reconstruction. The humans had returned to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. Mary Chun was back to managing agricultural schedules. Tom Rodriguez was treating sick livestock. Michael Park was planning lessons for the children. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what lived beneath their peaceful exterior. And I understood why Earth had been declared off-limits to all military operations by every major power in the galaxy. Zethvar stood slowly, his ancient joints creaking. "Tomorrow night, I will tell you about the time I witnessed an entire human fleet enter battle rage during the Void War. But tonight, remember this. Humans are not our enemies because they choose not to be. They have the power to destroy any of us, individually or collectively. They simply choose not to use it unless we force them to. Treat them with respect not because they demand it, but because they have earned it. Protect what they value not because you fear them, but because they have shown us what true strength looks like." As the crowd began to disperse, many of them looked thoughtful, others concerned, and all of them newly educated about the species that had so quietly taken its place among the galactic community. Commander Zethvar remained by the fire, staring into the flames and remembering the faces of the humans of New Terra. Tomorrow he would share his final tale, but tonight he wondered if any being truly understood the implications of humanity's gentle nature, and what happened when that gentleness was pushed too far. The Warriors' Hall was now packed beyond capacity. Word of Commander Zethvar's human tales had spread beyond the base, and representatives from multiple species had come to hear the final story. The old commander surveyed the crowd with weary eyes, noting the mix of curiosity, skepticism, and growing concern among the faces looking back at him. "3 nights ago, I began telling you about human rage," he started, his voice carrying easily through the hushed hall. "Tonight, I will share the most important lesson I learned during my centuries of service. What happens when an entire human fleet enters battle fury simultaneously?" Admiral Corthex of the Zentorian Navy had positioned himself near the front. "Commander, fleet actions are entirely different from individual incidents. Modern space warfare relies on coordination, technology, and tactical doctrine. Emotion plays no role." Zethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "That's what every military analyst believed, Admiral. until the Battle of Kepler's Gate during the Void War. The day an entire human battle group proved that their rage could be scaled up to encompass thousands of individuals working as one. The commander activated a holographic display showing a star system with multiple planets and a major shipping lane. Kepler's Gate was the most important trade junction in the Outer Rim. When the Void Syndicate decided to seize control of it, they brought the largest pirate fleet in recorded history. Over 200 ships, including captured military vessels and custom-built dreadnoughts. The humans had a small patrol fleet in the system, Zethvar continued. 15 ships, mostly frigates and destroyers. Standard peacekeeping force, nothing that should have posed a threat to a major assault fleet. The Syndicate commander, a being called the Void King, was so confident that he broadcast his demands to the entire system. Recruit in Aelthar raised his hand nervously. Commander, what were his demands? Complete surrender of all shipping lanes, payment of tribute from every world in the sector, and Zethvar's voice hardened. The delivery of all human children in the system to serve as slaves in his fleet operations. A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. Several beings shifted uncomfortably as they began to understand where the story was heading. The human fleet commander was Captain Sarah Vasquez, a career officer who had served in multiple conflicts. She was known for her diplomatic skills and her ability to de-escalate dangerous situations. When she received the Void King's demands, she requested a private communication channel. Zethvar gestured to the holographic display, showing the positions of the fleets. I was serving as a military observer aboard a council vessel at the edge of the system. We recorded her transmission to the Syndicate flagship. Captain Vasquez spoke calmly, professionally, even politely. She explained that the humans could not comply with the demands and offered to negotiate alternative terms. The Void King's response was to destroy a civilian transport carrying 300 beings, including 47 human children returning from a cultural exchange program. The commander's voice grew quiet, but somehow more intense. What happened next changed my understanding of what humans are capable of when pushed beyond their limits. Captain Vasquez didn't scream or rage or make threats. She simply closed the communication channel. Then, across the human fleet, something extraordinary began to happen. Admiral Corthex leaned forward. What do you mean, exactly? Every human ship in the fleet began broadcasting on an internal frequency, Zethvar explained. Not tactical communications or strategic coordination. They were sharing personal information, the names and ages of the children who had just died, details about their families, their dreams, their accomplishments. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chin spoke about his daughter Emma, who had been aboard that transport. She was 8 years old and wanted to be a xenobiologist. Commander Lisa Park shared memories of her nephew David, who had been writing a story about friendship between different species. The hall was completely silent now, every being absorbed in the commander's words. Within 30 minutes, every human in that fleet knew the name and story of every child who had died. They had transformed from individual military units into something collective, something unified by shared grief and fury. Zethvar manipulated the holographic display to show the battle formations. When Captain Vasquez gave the order to engage, what followed wasn't a conventional space battle. It was something that defied every principle of naval warfare. The human ships moved with impossible coordination, not the kind you get from good communications and training, but something deeper. They anticipated each other's actions, supported each other's maneuvers, covered each other's weaknesses as if they were all controlled by a single mind. Commander Rodriguez in the destroyer Defiant executed a ramming attack on a Syndicate cruiser that should have destroyed his ship. Instead, he timed it perfectly with covering fire from 3 other vessels, allowing him to disable the enemy while his ship survived with minimal damage. The engineering crew of the frigate Endeavor, led by Chief Petty Officer Kim Nakamura, somehow managed to increase their ship's power output by 40%. 40% beyond maximum rated capacity, Admiral. Their ship should have exploded from the overload, but human determination and fury made the impossible happen. Admiral Corthex looked skeptical. Commander, engineering systems have physical limitations that emotions cannot overcome. That's what I believe too, Zethvar replied. Until I saw the battle recordings. Chief Nakamura and her team had bypassed 17 different safety systems, rerouted power through backup circuits never designed for main power loads, and somehow managed to make modifications that improved efficiency while pushing everything beyond redline. When I asked her about it later, she simply said that failure wasn't an option because too many children were depending on them. The laws of physics, apparently, became secondary considerations. The commander gestured to show individual ship actions on the display. Captain Maria Santos in the heavy cruiser Indomitable found herself facing 5 Syndicate vessels simultaneously. Standard doctrine would have been to fall back and call for support. Instead, she ordered her ship to charge directly into the enemy formation. But it wasn't a suicide run. Every human ship in the fleet had somehow calculated the exact timing needed to support her attack. As Indomitable charged through the enemy formation, 14 other ships provided covering fire with precision that our best tactical computers couldn't have achieved. The result was that 5 Syndicate vessels were destroyed in less than 8 minutes, while Indomitable emerged damaged but intact. Zephar's voice grew more urgent as he continued. But the most disturbing aspect was their tactical adaptation. The humans began using strategies that weren't in any military manual. Dr. James Wilson, the fleet science officer, started analyzing Syndicate ship designs in real time and identifying weaknesses that no one had ever noticed before. Weapons Officer Lieutenant Sarah Kim began targeting specific subsystems with surgical precision, not to destroy enemy ships, but to disable them in ways that maximized psychological impact on the remaining fleet. Communications Specialist Petty Officer David Chun was intercepting Syndicate battle communications and somehow predicting their tactical decisions before they made them. He was reading patterns in their command structure that allowed the human fleet to stay 3 moves ahead constantly. The commander paused to let the implications sink in. Individual humans had become impossibly competent, but the truly terrifying thing was how they functioned as a unit. They shared information instantly, supported each other's decisions without hesitation, and adapted to changing conditions within human speed. When the Void King realized his fleet was being systematically destroyed by a force less than 1/10 its size, he tried to withdraw. Captain Vasquez could have let him go. Military doctrine would have called it a victory. Instead, she opened a fleet-wide communication channel and said 5 words that still give me nightmares. Remember the children. No survivors. A shocked murmur ran through the hall. Admiral Corthex looked genuinely disturbed. Commander, are you saying the humans executed surrendering enemies? I'm saying they gave the Syndicate the same mercy the Syndicate had shown those children, Zethvar replied grimly. Which was none. The human fleet pursued the fleeing pirates across 3 star systems, systematically hunting down every ship, every base, every trace of the organization. But they weren't mindless in their vengeance. Every tactical decision was calculated for maximum effectiveness. They captured intelligence that allowed them to track down Syndicate operations across dozens of worlds. They freed thousands of slaves and recovered stolen goods worth billions of credits. The operation took 6 months and involved coordination with multiple governments and law enforcement agencies. The humans had transformed their rage into the most successful anti-piracy campaign in galactic history. Zethvar deactivated the holographic display and faced his audience directly. When it was over, I had the opportunity to interview Captain Vasquez. She was back to being the diplomatic, professional officer she had always been. But when I asked her about the battle, her eyes grew dark for just a moment. She said, Commander, humans learned long ago that there are lines that cannot be crossed without consequences. Threatening children crosses that line. What you witnessed wasn't unusual human behavior. It was a promise kept. The commander began pacing again, his voice taking on a tone of urgent warning. After studying human history, I learned that their wars follow patterns. When they fight for territory or resources, they can be negotiated with, defeated, or convinced to withdraw. But when they fight to protect the innocent, when they fight against what they perceive as evil, they become unstoppable. Their own records tell of conflicts where they accepted casualties that would have broken any other species rather than compromise their principles. Wars where they fought against impossible odds because surrender meant accepting something they couldn't live with. Captain Vasquez showed me historical records of human conflicts. Battles where humans continued fighting with ammunition exhausted and weapons broken. Sieges where they chose death rather than surrender their values. Campaigns where they pursued enemies across continents and oceans because some crimes cannot be forgiven. Young recruit Vexera spoke up quietly. "Commander, are you saying humans are inherently violent?" "No," Zethvar replied immediately. "That's the most important thing to understand. Humans are inherently protective. Violence is simply the tool they use when protection requires it. They would rather build than destroy, heal than harm, create rather than consume. But when forced to choose between their principles and their lives, they will choose their principles every time." The Void War ended because other pirate organizations learned what happened to the Syndicate. They realized that targeting human civilians, especially children, would bring consequences that no amount of profit could justify. The humans never threatened anyone. They never demanded tribute or submission. They simply made it clear that certain behaviors would be met with absolute response. Admiral Corthex stood slowly. "Commander, you're describing a species that could dominate the entire galaxy if they chose to." "Exactly," Zethvar confirmed. "A species that could conquer us all but chooses instead to trade with us, learn from us, and protect us. Do you understand how remarkable that is? How terrifying and wonderful it is to share the galaxy with beings capable of such restraint. Every human ship carries enough firepower to devastate worlds. Every human colony could become an impregnable fortress if threatened. Every human individual possesses the potential for violence that could shatter civilizations. But they don't use these capabilities for conquest or domination. They use them to protect the weak, defend the innocent, and preserve the peace that allows all our species to flourish." The commander looked around the hall, meeting eyes with beings from dozens of different worlds. "The greatest mistake any of us could make would be to misinterpret human gentleness as weakness. Their kindness is not a limitation, it's a choice. Their diplomacy is not fear, it's wisdom. Their restraint is not inability, it's strength beyond measure. When humans offer friendship, they mean it. When they promise protection, they deliver it. When they commit to justice, they achieve it. And when they declare something unacceptable, he let the implications hang in the air. The humans have taught us that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary, and the restraint to use it only then." Zethvar moved back to the fire, which had burned low during his long tale. "I have served in the military for over 2 centuries. I have fought alongside warriors from every species in the galaxy. But I have never encountered anything as formidable as human rage channeled through human wisdom. They are our allies because they choose to be. They are our protectors because they believe in justice. They are our friends because they value life. All life, not just their own. Remember these stories, all of you. Share them with your squad mates, your commanders, your governments. Not to spread fear, but to spread understanding. The humans walk among us not as conquerors, but as guardians. They have made themselves our shield against the darkness, our sword against injustice. And, perhaps most importantly, they have shown us what we could become if we chose strength over power, protection over domination, justice over advantage." As the crowd began to disperse, many deep in thought, Commander Zethvar remained by the dying fire. He had shared his most important lessons, passed on his greatest warnings, and hopefully helped ensure that the galaxy would never forget what it meant to have humans as allies rather than enemies. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, but now every being who had heard these tales understood that among those stars moved a species that had mastered the most difficult balance of all, the balance between the capacity for infinite destruction and the wisdom to choose infinite creation instead. The legends of human rage would spread throughout the galaxy, not as warnings of a threat, but as reminders of what true strength looked like when guided by true compassion. And perhaps, in some distant future, other species might learn to follow the example the humans had set, to be strong enough to protect everything they loved, and wise enough to love everything worth protecting.